Ananya Sharma, a 24-year-old woman from India, boarded a flight to Paris chasing her lifelong dream. 60 days later, her name was no longer in travel blogs or photo captions. It was in the newspapers, linked to a suitcase pulled from the River Seine. What began as a journey of freedom ended as one of the most chilling mysteries of obsession and betrayal. She was 24 when she boarded her first international flight, her heart racing with excitement and fear. Born in a middle-class family in India, she had always carried within her a quiet hunger for adventure. While others around her spoke of settling down, of marriage, of responsibilities, she dreamed of wide streets, foreign languages, and a life unshackled by expectations. For her, Paris was not just a city, it was a promise of freedom, of beauty, of discovery, the kind of place she had only read about in books and seen in films. And now, with her carefully saved money and her parents' reluctant blessing, she was finally on her way. When she landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport, the moment felt almost unreal. The crisp air carried a different scent, the voices around her rolled with accents she had never heard up close before, and the glowing signs in French seemed like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She wheeled her small suitcase through the bustling terminal, holding on tightly to the paper with her apartment address scribbled on it. It wasn't luxurious, just a modest one, room space in the 10th arrondissement, but to her it was more than enough. It was hers. The first few days unfolded like pages of a fairy tale. She wandered along cobblestone streets, pausing to watch artists sketch near the Seine. She tasted fresh croissants that flaked in her hands, sipped strong coffee in tiny cups, and snapped photos of everything, from the grandeur of Notre Dame to the quiet beauty of street lamps at dusk. Each night, she uploaded her pictures and wrote short captions for her friends and family back home. They cheered her courage, admired her independence, and asked for more. She loved the attention, but even more, she loved the feeling of belonging to herself for the first time in her life. Her days developed a rhythm. Mornings at a language class where she struggled but laughed, afternoons spent exploring museums where she stood in awe of paintings older than her country's freedom, evenings filled with long walks and the click of her camera. She became familiar with the bakery owner who greeted her with a smile, the flower seller who arranged roses in buckets outside the metro, and the students who played guitar in the park. Life felt like a dream, a bubble of joy she hoped would never burst. Yet even in her happiness, she carried a small unease, a whisper of something she couldn't name. At night, as she sat by her window overlooking the narrow street, she sometimes felt as though the city itself was watching her, waiting for the story to take a turn she had not yet imagined. It began as nothing more than a flicker in the corner of her eye. The first time she noticed him, she was standing near the fountain at Place de la République, holding her camera up toward the sky, trying to capture the way pigeons scattered in a sudden burst of wings. When she later scrolled through her photos that evening, she spotted a blurred figure standing at a distance. His face was indistinct, lost in the crowd, but his posture seemed fixed on her. She thought little of it then, assuming he was simply another passer-by caught by chance in her lens. But soon the pattern became harder to ignore. At the metro station, as she descended the stairs to catch her train, she caught sight of a man leaning against the tiled wall, his gaze directed toward her. At a cafe, she lifted her cup of coffee, and in the reflection of the window, noticed a tall shape lingering just outside. When she visited the Louvre, wandering between tourists and paintings, she felt a strange awareness press against her back, and when she turned, she glimpsed him again. Same build, same dark coat, eyes that shifted away the moment hers met them. At first she dismissed her unease as paranoia. Paris was busy, full of faces, and perhaps she had simply grown too attentive, imagining connections where none existed. Yet the feeling continued to gnaw at her. The city's charm began to warp at the edges. What had felt liberating started to feel slightly claustrophobic, as though every step she took was being observed by someone she could not shake. Neighbors in her building would later recall seeing a man waiting by the entrance late at night. He never knocked, never spoke, but leaned against the iron gate with the air of someone who had nowhere else to be, A florist down the street remembered a stranger buying single roses, always red, always leaving quickly after. Though she never told her family or friends, she wrote a single line in her journal, asterisk, "I think someone is following me." Asterisk, the tension of his silent presence grew heavier with each passing day. She could not point to a reason, she could not prove his intent, but she felt it. An invisible thread tying her every move to his unseen eyes. The magic of Paris still sparkled around her, but beneath its glow, shadows were beginning to lengthen. The city she had dreamed of no longer felt entirely hers. It belonged now to something darker, something waiting, patient and deliberate, just out of reach. On the 43rd day of her stay, the rhythm of her life in Paris abruptly stopped. Until then, her family back home had grown used to the steady stream of updates. Pictures of pastries, selfies in front of landmarks, short captions about her daily adventures. Suddenly, her accounts went silent. Hours passed, then a full day, then two. At first, her parents assumed she was busy with her studies or traveling somewhere without internet access. But as the silence stretched into days, worry began to build. Calls to her phone rang endlessly without answer, emails went unread, and messages on social media remained unseen. The cheerful voice they were so used to hearing had vanished without explanation. Her landlord was the first to act. After several days of not seeing her leave or return, he went upstairs and found the door to her apartment slightly ajar. Inside, the room appeared untouched. Her suitcase was still neatly placed in the corner, her clothes folded in the closet, her passport and wallet sitting safely on the desk. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture. It was as though she had simply stepped out and never returned. Yet one detail disturbed him enough to call the police. Her camera, the one she carried everywhere, was missing, and on the windowsill rested a single red rose. Investigators retraced her last known movements, combing through nearby surveillance footage. The most recent image they found showed her leaving a cafe in the late evening, wearing her favorite red scarf. She looked calm, unaware of anything unusual, but behind her, at a careful distance, a man in a dark coat followed. The grainy footage captured him stepping into the same street she walked down, never rushing, never too close, but always there. As the investigation widened, her absence became front page news in both France and India. Newspapers described her as a bright, adventurous young woman who had vanished without a trace in the heart of Paris. For those who knew her, it was unimaginable that she would simply disappear voluntarily. She had been full of plans, speaking often of all she still wanted to see. Friends, family, and even strangers lit candles outside the cafe where she was last seen, a silent vigil for someone whose story was quickly slipping into mystery. With each day that passed, hope began to fade, replaced by a growing fear that the city had swallowed her whole. The truth surfaced in the most brutal way imaginable. Weeks after her disappearance, fishermen along the River Seine spotted something heavy floating against the current. At first glance, it looked like debris wrapped in dark tape, but when they pulled it ashore, the weight and the smell told a different story. Inside the suitcase they cut open lay her remains, carefully concealed but impossible to erase. News spread quickly, and by the next morning her name dominated headlines in Paris and echoed across India. The young traveler who had once shared images of joy and freedom was now the center of a grim international tragedy. Detectives moved swiftly, piecing together fragments of her last days. The rose left behind in her apartment, the missing camera, and the shadowy figure from the surveillance footage all pointed to something carefully planned rather than random. Their investigation uncovered that the man trailing her was no stranger to the city. He had once worked at a small language school where she had briefly enrolled during her first week. Fired months earlier for inappropriate conduct toward female students, he had developed a pattern of fixation. For reasons no one could fully explain, she became his obsession. Witnesses came forward recalling his presence near her apartment, his habit of waiting in alleys, his odd questions about where she might be headed. Police searched his small rented room and found a disturbing collection: photographs of her taken without her knowledge, notes about her daily routine, and her missing camera tucked neatly in a drawer. Among the images was a chilling detail. He had been following her since her very first week, recording moments she never realized were being watched. Yet the story grew darker still. Investigators discovered that he had not acted alone in cultivating his obsession. On his phone were messages from someone in India, a person who knew her well. The exchange revealed bitterness, envy, and a willingness to share personal details about her habits and her past. The stalker had been given information he could not have known otherwise: where she was living, the classes she attended, even her favorite places to walk at night. The betrayal was staggering. It was not only a stranger who had hunted her in Paris, but also someone from home who had quietly guided him. The suitcase in the Seine told the end of her life, but the trail of evidence revealed something far more sinister. A crime woven from obsession, manipulation, and betrayal that stretched across continents. The dream of Paris had been poisoned long before she even realized the danger surrounding her. The case left scars that went far beyond the banks of the Seine. In Paris, the discovery of her body sparked outrage and grief, turning her story into a painful reminder of how quickly beauty and freedom could collapse into horror. Candlelight vigils were held in the neighborhoods where she had once walked. Strangers leaving flowers and photographs at the cafe she had visited on her final night. Tourists paused by the river, staring at the spot where the suitcase had been pulled ashore, whispering her name as though she had become part of the city's history, etched into its memory forever. Back in India, her family's grief was amplified by the headlines that screamed across newspapers and television screens. Images of her smiling in front of Paris landmarks were now paired with grim updates about the investigation. For those who had once admired her courage to travel alone, her death became a bitter warning. Debates erupted across media outlets and living rooms. Was it safe for women to travel abroad alone? How could someone's closest circle contribute to such betrayal? The betrayal by a person she had once trusted cut the deepest, proving that danger is not always found in strangers but can grow quietly in the shadows of familiarity. Her funeral was attended by hundreds. Relatives, friends, neighbors, and even people who had never met her gathered to pay their respects. The photographs she had once proudly shared were displayed beside her casket, showing her wide smile, her joy, her belief in a life filled with possibility. Yet those images now carried a haunting weight. They were the last traces of a story cut short. The red scarf she had worn on the night she vanished became a symbol, draped across her coffin as if to remind everyone of both her light and her tragic end. Though her life ended in violence, her story continued to echo long after. Documentaries, articles, and social media campaigns carried her name, not only as a cautionary tale, but also as a call for change. She became a face for conversations about women's safety, about the unseen dangers of obsession, and about the betrayal that sometimes lies closest to home. Paris had been her dream, but it was also where her life was stolen. 60 days after her departure, she became known across 2 countries, not for the adventures she had hoped to share, but as a symbol of how quickly freedom can turn into tragedy. Her memory lived on, carved in grief, warning, and remembrance.